Hey, good evening, everybody.
Hello, how are you?
I am fantastic.
I just want to let everyone know that we are streaming online or YouTube right now.
Thank you.
But you're not.
We'll wait a couple more minutes to see if other people join us. Does that sound good?
Sounds fine.
Okay.
Dave,
Yes.
I don't know what's going on. We're getting a repeat. I'm streaming to YouTube and we're getting that repeat.
Can you turn the volume down on if you're playing the YouTube videos? So if the YouTube is up and the sound is on, you're going to get the repeat. So if you just turn the volume down on whatever you're streaming YouTube through, that should take care of the problem. So if you have, do you have a browser open with the YouTube channel up?
Yes.
All
Turn
right.
it down.
Turn it off. Yeah. Turn off the volume. Yeah.
I can't shut off the volume because it's on my computer.
Within the browser, you should be able to lower the volume with this in the screen.
Within the browser.
Someone say something so we know
If you mute your if you mute the Zoom audio on your side, does it stop the repeat? Just mute your audio and let me know if.
Then I won't hear.
No, you can hear us. We won't be able to hear you. So try to mute your audio and see if that helps.
Okay.
So just thumbs up or thumbs down if it's still repeating the echo. Up or down? Is it working? Okay.
I don't hear the echo now. I was hearing it distinctly before.
Right. It's because there's a number of, oh, there we go. So I don't know how to fix it, Joan, on your end, other than you have a microphone that's picking up the YouTube feed and picking up the live feed, and one of them has to be muted.
I just clicked off the my Google where YouTube was running, so I'm hoping I didn't mess anything up.
It still says live on YouTube, so we're probably okay. So are we waiting for anybody else? Or is everybody on?
I think everybody's almost on, but not quite.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, I can hear you.
As it said, I was muted. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't anymore.
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
All right. My screen says Barry Walker is not here yet.
I think Barry's on. It's just the video's not on.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
totally here.
Okay.
Body and
Yeah.
soul.
I'm eating dinner. I didn't know that's rude. But here,
Well,
Why don't we
we're-
go ahead and get started maybe? Hey,
Yeah.
Barry.
hello.
We're waiting for Kathy Goyne
Oh, okay.
isn't
Okay.
here. That may be it because Ray Ryle said he's going to be late. He's going to sign on later.
Okay. Well, thanks for being patient here. We're all still getting used to these various virtual meeting setups. So thank you for being patient. One of the complicating factors is we're streaming all of this stuff on YouTube, and so we're learning as we go. So thank you for your patience.
Absolutely. I think we're all learning.
Yeah. The most important skill is hitting that when you're not talking. So make sure that you hit the mute button.
I'm going to go ahead and get started if that's okay.
Kathy's just signing in now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Another one's coming. That's all I have.
Okay, great. I talked to Joan before the meeting, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. So you may be looking at the materials, that were emailed, but I'm going to share my screen also so we can just all go over the same materials. And the good thing also is that the materials I have in Word, I can just make notes, in the documents as we go along. So we can all see my poor typing skills, but we can all see the notes, at the same time. So if you can take out your agendas, we will start. Oh, host has disabled participant screen sharing.
I'm sharing the screen, so you should be able to put something up.
It still says host has disabled participant screen sharing. But
I think we can see your screen now.
that's not my screen.
Oh, okay.
That's mine, and it says you are screen sharing. So
We're looking at Franklin Township screen. So you need to, so maybe Janine, go up to view options and request remote control, or wait, let's see here. There should be another thing here where it says allowing screen sharing. At the bottom of your screen, hit the share screen button.
Yeah, don't request control. That's no good.
That's right. It's at the bottom. There's a share screen button.
I'm doing that over and over again, and I'm
Oh.
getting the message saying host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, okay. So you have to, Joan, we'll have to enable as the host, enable screen sharing.
okay, I'm at the bottom where it says share screen.
So it should be under meetings, like a meeting settings.
Oh, I thought I knew how to do this.
There's a button next to screen sharing that allows users to share. So look at the bottom where it says share screen, and there should be a button down there.
There is, and that's what I clicked on, but it's my computer that it's showing.
Well, you can go ahead and share the agenda if you want, and we can just go through your computer if you're
I
okay with that.
I don't have it ready because I thought you were going to do it.
So Joan,
Start
in
over.
Janine's, is it Janine?
Yes.
In her upper right corner of her picture are 3 dots. Are there any options up there? on your?
No,
No.
Benny
mean-
is,
Uh,
Benny can chime in. Maybe he's a tech guy at our office. Everybody knows
Hi.
Benny.
Next to the share screen button, whoever the host is, I'm not sure, there should be a little up arrow, like a little carrot, and if you hit it, it'll bring up a pop-up, and then I'll let you click on allow users to share their screen. And then Janine will be able to put hers up.
Okay, I clicked on the arrow and it says,
It's working now, Joan. Clicking on the arrow must have worked because now I can share my screen. So can you all see the agenda?
Yes.
Yay!
Success.
Yay. Thank you,
So-
Benny, for your help.
So we see,
I think what would be good to do is I'm going to go through the agenda, but I think what would be also be good to do is for everybody to just introduce themselves briefly, since we certainly don't know you guys and you don't know us. So I will start and then I'll turn it over to my two colleagues at Chester County Planning Commission, and then I guess I'll call on people based on who I have on the tiles. So I'm Janine Spears. I am a community planner at Chester County Planning Commission, a senior community planner. I've been there for a number of years and I've worked with various municipalities on comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, subdivision ordinances, and a variety of other projects. I recently worked with your neighbor to the east, London Britton Township, and I worked with them years ago drafting their comprehensive plan, and then I worked with them as a grant monitor. They received a grant through the county, just like you all have, except they chose to go with a private consultant. And then I monitored that project, so I worked with them very recently as well. I also have a specialty in the office historic preservation person planner. And then I also have a specialty in dealing with the Brandywine battlefield and the preservation of that and the planning for that. So I'm going to turn it over quickly to my two colleagues, Mason Gilbert, and he can go next and introduce himself, and then Benny will go after him.
Hello, my name is Mason Gilbert. I have been with the Planning Commission for just over a year now, working on a variety of different projects, including this comp plan, the Tredyffrin comp plan, a project in Westchester, East Fallowfield. So this actually isn't my first project in Franklin Township. My previous position at Chester County was the Open Space Preservation Program, and I helped preserve the Josephine Boxler farm and the Robert and Susan Schultz property in Franklin. So I have a little experience with the township, but I'm really excited to be part of this. And I'm going to be helping Janine do most of the writing, editing, and making sure this turns out great. So that's me.
Hi, my name's Benny. I am actually only with the Planning Commission for 3 months now. I started at the end of February, so this is all still pretty new to me, but I'm excited to be here. I'm the tech services specialist at the Planning Commission, so I do a little bit of GIS work as well as tech backup. And Franklin Township will be my first comprehensive plan project I'm working on, but I'm very grateful to be a part of it. And I will be working with Mason and Janine to get the maps looking the way we want them and provide accurate information for the township. But it's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you, Benny. Nan, do you go by Nan or Nancy?
I go by Nan. It comes up
Okay.
as Nancy is my real name, but
Okay.
Nan is what I go by.
Hi, Nan.
Hi. So I'm on the HARB and the Historical Committee right now. I've been a supervisor for 6 years, a couple years ago now, and I was originally on the Open Space Committee that started open space in Franklin Township. I've lived in Franklin Township for 25 years. I own a 60-acre farm where I have horses.
Thank you. Mary?
oh, you gotta unmute Mary.
Mary or Barry?
Mary.
Mary, it's Mary. I am currently a Franklin Township supervisor as of this past January, so I'm very, very new to this. Dave and I campaigned together, and this was one of the items we really wanted to get done, and we promised our residents. So we're quite excited to be working on this. And I've lived in the township for over 30 years, and both my children went to the local schools. And now it's just my husband and I in this house, but I'm excited about this, but I'm going to need help because I'm real new at all this. So thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
So like Mary, I'm a new supervisor. We were elected this past year. And I've lived in the township for 6 years. My wife and I have two kids, Lucy and Emmett. They are 7 and 4, and they are entering into the school systems now. And we're trying to make Franklin Township a place we can be proud to call home. So thank you all for volunteering.
Thank you. Chuck?
Chuck Phillips. I'm an architect. I'm on the planning board. I'm on HARB and the Historic Commission. I've been in the township for over 30 years. Very excited to be on this.
Thank you. John?
My name is John Auerbach. I'm a supervisor in Franklin Township. I lived in the township for 41 years, a 50-acre farm. I've been on the board for 9 years.
Thank you. Jerry?
I'm Jerry Hopka. I've lived in the township for about 5 years. I've been retired for about 20, so this is something new for me. In my past life, I practiced law for a corporation.
Welcome. Dave? You're on mute, Dave.
Oh, there you go. Very new to me, all this. Lived in the township for 66 years. I farm in this township and adjoining townships and states. So that's about all I got to offer there right now.
Thank you. Kathy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Goen. I've lived in the township since 2013. My husband and I own Cat and Matthew Farms. We farm almost 90 acres in the township. And it's nice to see all my neighbors on this Zoom. I hope you're all doing well.
Thank you. Paul?
Hi, Paul Overton. I was a supervisor for 6 years with Nan and also on the Open Space Committee and currently on the Parks and Rec Committee.
Thank you. Barry?
So we built a home here 4 years ago. We've loved it ever since. I've been at UD as a professor for 20 years, and I teach laser science and physics, and found myself here after being born in Oklahoma. So whatever, we've enjoyed the area very much.
And then Paul.
Hi, so I'm Paul Lagasse. I'm the chairman of the Historical Commission in HARB, and I'm basically attending as a member of the audience. Just interested to see how this goes.
I like that flag, Paul. Behind you.
Yeah, you know what it is.
I do. It's the battle flag.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and Janine, I've met you at the HARB and HE chairs events in February. You've
Okay, with
often
the network.
attended those. Yes.
Okay.
So
great.
So Janine, I'm going through the list here. There's like 15 people that are, some of them are spectators and some of them are actually on the committee. Do you have a list in front of you of who the actual committee members are? So we don't need to necessarily go through all of the spectators who are just here to listen. Might just to save some time.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you have that.
I'd also like to mention, I think we skipped Dave Hawkins somehow. He's on the tiles, but I don't think he spoke. Did I miss him?
Yeah, I want to make sure that we're all the
'Cause
board.
he's on the committee. He's a local
spoke?
farmer. Dave Hocking. I saw him. He was on the dials.
Yeah,
Oh,
he did speak.
Did he
Can you
speak?
hear me?
He did.
Oh, sorry.
He spoke that he was a farmer.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
just want to make sure.
Okay, moving on, I'm going to share my screen and you can all see the agenda. So just quickly going over what we're going to be doing tonight, we're going to be looking at the grant agreement. This project is being done under a grant through Chester County that Franklin Township applied for. Then we're going to be looking at the scope of work under that grant agreement. And right before this meeting, I provided a more detailed version of that scope of work. Then we're going to be moving into materials. Before the meeting, we provided a draft table of contents, chapter 1 and then chapter 2. And then hopefully, if time permits, we will start to discuss priority subject areas for the comprehensive plan. So first, let's look at the contract with the county. And I'm not going to go through this in any detail, this particular sheet, but this is an overview of the contract process. And it's basically a cheat sheet of the contract process that points out very specific key items in the contract that we provide. We provide the sheet to you so that you have a summary of the more extensive contract. So moving into the contract itself, I went through and I highlighted key items in the contract. Under the contract with the county, there is a meeting, and this serves as the meeting, and it's called the initial briefing meeting. And you'll see in this cheat sheet, it is right here. So this meeting we're having right now serves to address that point of the contract. So it's a pretty standard contract, terminology, general conditions, and I'm just going to hit key items as I said. Under general conditions on page 1, the project shall conceive consistency with the goals and objectives of Landscapes 3. Landscapes 3 is the recent version of the county comprehensive plan, also the grant application, and then the scope of work in this contract. So the township shall meet the terms of the grant manual, and specifically, since this is a comprehensive plan, the township is to adopt the comprehensive plan under the municipality's planning code requirements. The contract is a total of $61,780, and you can see it's broken up into 70-30%, whereby the township is paying for the 30%, and then the grant is for the 70% figure. And the contract term, it's a 2-year contract, so it started April 1st and it will end March 31st, 2020. There are provisions by which the township can apply for a contract extension, but the township has an aggressive scope, as you will see going forward. And so I don't anticipate that being the case or the township desiring that to happen. Payment and compensation. The county, our office, Chester County Planning Commission, will be submitting quarterly invoices to Franklin Township over the entire contract period. And those invoices will amount to this $18,000 total number, or 30% of the total cost to produce the comprehensive plan. So moving down into the signature pages next. So then we move into Appendix A, and these are the articles of agreement. This is where we go through the different responsibilities of the various parties, being the municipality and the county. The county's responsibilities pretty much mimic Franklin's responsibilities, so I'm going to start with Franklin's responsibilities. So again, like we saw in the general services, we will achieve the scope of work and achieve consistency with Landscapes 3. Then under subpoint 3, the township has established a comprehensive plan task force. There is at least a member of the planning commission. The township also, and the task force, will appoint a chairperson and a vice chairperson, if so desired, to lead the work program. What the chairperson does is, I, along with Mason and Benny, are the consultants and the technical assistants. But as being a consultant and providing technical assistance, I am not a chairperson for the task force. And so the chairperson would effectively run the meetings, also field questions if there's public questions. If we need to move on in the agenda because we're falling behind on the agenda or going too quickly, the chairperson would also control the flow of the meeting. So possibly Nan, given her experience with comprehensive plans in the past, could be considered for a chairperson, but again, it is not I do not choose this as the consultant, nor does Benny or does Mason. So this would be a township/task force decision. How do you feel about having Nan as the chair, and then you all can choose a vice chair amongst yourselves?
So first, I think one of the things that we might want to make clear is who on this call is actually on the committee, comprehensive plan committee, because it's not really clear by our titles. So we have Barry Walker is on the committee, Chuck Phillips, Cindy Aldridge, Dave Hawking, Kathy Goyne, Nan Latimer, Paul Overton, Mary McVeigh, and Ray Reale. Did I say, Ray, did I say your name correctly? If you're on.
He's not on here right now, Dave.
Okay, hopefully I said his name correctly.
No, it's pronounced Ryle.
Ryle, okay.
And I believe Cindy's also no longer on the task force, right, Joan?
Correct. She has resigned.
Cindy's off it, okay. Okay, so Cindy's
Do we
off.
need to find someone else?
I think there's an adequate amount of
Yeah,
members.
so we have 9. We have 9 now. 1, 2, or 10. 1, 2.
This is Jerry Hopka. You didn't mention my name.
And Jerry Hopka, okay. Okay, all right. So I think we have a quorum minus Cindy, and Ray is not on the list here. So I guess the first question is, Nan, would you be interested in chairing this committee?
I'm perfectly happy to do it.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Done, Nan.
Like, phew.
So I make a motion to nominate Nan Latimer as chairperson of the 2020 Comprehensive Plan. So all in favor, say aye, or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries 9 to something, whatever we got, but we don't really, it's not really a motion. So,
right.
So congratulations, Nan.
Do we need to pick somebody as a vice chair in case I can't attend the meeting for whatever reason? So somebody else has to step up?
I was interested, Joan, if there was anyone on the committee who expressed an interest in being chair. Is there anyone in that capacity?
You've got her as chairman.
I was the one who stepped up.
Are we completely short of a second possible one?
Oh, are you suggesting yourself?
No.
Oh, okay. All right, well, we can back up. So would anyone else like to be chair of this committee that we didn't consider? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay.
Okay, so there will be no vice chair.
No. We were looking for somebody else who might want to be chair that we overlooked.
Okay.
All right. So now, would somebody like to be vice chair? This would be a person who, if Nan can't make a meeting or can't talk to the Board of Supervisors at some point, would take her place.
Show me.
Somebody? Anybody?
I want to see.
Can I put somebody on the spot? Kathy, would you like to be the vice chair? No. Chuck?
Thank you. Get me another time.
All right. Chuck, would you like to be the vice chair?
No, thank you.
Jerry, anybody? I'll do it. I just was hoping someone other than a supervisor.
Barry's got his thumb up. What does that mean, Barry?
Oh, Barry. Where's Barry?
That was in support of the other individuals you were calling out by name, actually.
Ah.
I second.
Barry, would you
Barry's
like to be the
nomination.
vice chair?
I'm afraid that I can't with the university and the COVID situation right now, but I would love to do it otherwise. So,
Okay. No problem.
yeah. But I'm fully in support of Nan and Kathy. I thought you would have been great, and David, fine, great.
All right. I don't know. Is it appropriate? What's the process?
I'll do it. I'll do
All
it.
right. Good.
Oh, yay.
Nan can't miss any meetings. So just for you, Barry.
Was it peer pressure? Did we get to you?
And Barry. I thought
Okay.
Barry was so sweet about it. And Oklahoma.
All right.
But Nan is never going to miss a meeting. So I'm not even going to worry about
Not going to be a problem.
I don't know. 2 years is a long time.
it. Not going to miss one. So I'm good.
Okay, we have that taken care of. So let's move on through the contract. So you're seeing subpoint 4, we're attending the initial briefing meeting. The purpose of this is so that everybody is on the same page with the grant agreement and the contract, and nobody's surprised later by what it means or what it is. The Franklin Township and the task force will review the materials sent, comment on the materials, and then reach consensus on the materials. And if there's any change in meeting, Franklin will let us know a week prior so that we can make arrangements for the new time frame for the meeting. Moving on to our responsibilities, as I said before, they basically mimic the township's responsibilities. 2 items that do not mimic that is, one is over the course of the project, if we're steering away in some way from the Vision Partnership Grant Program requirements, then we'll let you know about that. And also, as I talked about in the beginning, if there's any amendments, extensions, etc., for the contract, then you would let me know and we would talk about how to address that. Moving on to the scope of work. This is Appendix B. So we will comply, as you're seeing right here, with the municipality's planning code, and that's Article 3 for comprehensive plans. That's the state enabling legislation that allows us to do comprehensive plans in municipalities and in the county. The plan will be organized as below, and this is different from your current comprehensive plan. The township wanted a plan that was more streamlined and got to the root of the points in a more efficient way. So in that regard, the plan will look like this. It will have a background with the introduction, the community profile, and then existing conditions. The first 2 chapters you've already received. The 3rd chapter we should be talking about at the meeting next month. The existing conditions will go through this information that you're seeing listed in bullet points. Then we'll move on to the planning recommendations chapters. And we anticipate there'll be 4 to 6 of those chapters. They'll be topic-based or geography-based. Topic-based, as we list here, could be connectivity, it could be historic resources. Area-based could be the village. For example, you want to do a village plan and have that be a focused area. So in talking to the township in putting together the scope of work, the items listed here, connectivity, multimodal, parks and recreation, open space, historic preservation, and environmental resources seem to come to mind as possible focus areas. And then based on the municipality's planning code, there would be a chapter on housing and land use. We also have the ability in our office to provide renderings, drawings for you if they are needed as part of this process. For example, a drawing of maybe the revised intersection in the village. Then these chapters will have recommendations. They'll be as specific as possible to address the concerns that have been identified that are priorities to the township. The contract allows for up to 15 of the work session meetings that we're having, for example, this meeting. In addition, for outreach, there'll be a couple different forms of outreach, and one form is that Mason and I will be conducting stakeholder interviews. This group will identify up to 8 individuals that we will then call or email, whichever way is more feasible, and ask them a series of questions to interview them for very specific items related to this process. And we'll put the information in a summary and send that information to the task force. Then there's also going to be a public stakeholder meeting, and that's going to happen in the first couple months, public workshop. And Joan and I already talked about that with the pandemic situation. Probably that first workshop will have to happen via Zoom. And we will have to coordinate on how to, make that happen via Zoom, because it does not seem in the next couple months it's going to be a reality to have that workshop in person, nor may the township have many participants to have that workshop in person. Then later on in the process, there'll be another public meeting, and this meeting will be to vet materials that the task force has described, including recommendations and other draft materials. And then per the municipality's planning code, there has to be one official Township Planning Commission meeting held that's a public meeting, and then of course the public hearing by the Board of Supervisors, and those are both late in the process. Moving through the rest of the contract, we go through mapping, we go through publication draft services, and then we get into the project schedule. And for the project schedule, I am going to actually move on to another document that I provided before this meeting. And that is a more detailed schedule. It reflects what you're seeing in the grant contract, but it goes into a little bit more detail in terms of time frames, et cetera. So I think it would be easier just to run through the schedule rather than through the grant contract.
Jeannie, before you go too far, on the public outreach, did you mention a survey, a public survey?
I'm going to get to that in this schedule rather than going through it in the contract.
Okay.
I just thought it would be a little bit easier to see it in the time frame. But thank you for asking the question. So this project scope and schedule, you see it talks about the contract term. It talks about the work sessions. They'll be happening the fourth Tuesdays, 6:30 p.m. And as it says, there'll be up to 15 work sessions with this group. It lists Benny, Mason, and myself. We'll be sending out materials prior to the meeting to the task force like we did for this meeting. And importantly, under the materials section, as I said before, the goal of the township was to create a concise and usable document that contains enough text to explain the concepts and then illustrative graphics, but not so much text that people get lost in the text. The current comp plan and the information in it is being used as a background resource, but as you saw from the materials that were mailed, this comp plan is proposed to look quite different than the current comp plan. So I just want everybody to understand that and be on the same page with that before we go, too far into the process. So moving into the actual schedule itself, we've identified the schedule based on months that the task force is meeting, what type of meeting it is. Is it a task force meeting or is it a public community workshop type of meeting? And then what month of the contract are we actually in the left column? So we took the first 2 months in April to May to start to develop some background materials. And then here in June, we have our first task force meeting, which is the kickoff meeting, that initial briefing meeting that you saw in the contract, and then going through introductory materials, namely the table of contents, the introduction, and then the community profile chapters. And then hopefully at the end of this meeting, we can get into a preliminary discussion, at least here, about some of the plan priority subject areas. In the next month, we're going to look at that existing conditions chapter that we talked about, and that will be a summary of basically all your existing conditions in the township. And we will be also talking about the online community survey to get into Paul's question. As part of the contract, an online community survey using an application such as SurveyMonkey was decided upon. So we will be putting together a draft survey for you all to review the questions of, and take it from there in that month. And then after you agree to the questions, it will then be put on SurveyMonkey for a little bit over a month for the community to access and to provide input. In July, we're also going to be fleshing out a little bit of the critical planning items that will become the recommendation chapters that we talked about in the contract. And we'll also be deciding on who should be interviewed for the stakeholders. Then in August, and this was the Zoom meeting that I was talking about, we have the first community workshop. And this would be to talk to the community about some of the items the task force has talked about, namely the first 2 chapters of the project, now also some of the base priority subject areas, and then to do an exercise about what items should be preserved in the township, what items should be enhanced in the township, and what items should be transformed in the township or changed in the township. We'll meet again as a task force to discuss the takeaways from the community workshop and how that changes some of the materials or some of the items the task force talked about. We will then, based on the community feedback, come up with a list of finalizing the list of priority subject areas. And then what are the critical recommendations, critical items to discuss in those priority subject areas. And then at the end of the month, we'll be closing the digital survey. So the digital community survey would go from sometime in August to sometime in September. Then in October and November, we would be discussing the survey results. We will be putting together a bullet list of plan recommendations based on the survey results and based on these priority subject areas. The recommendations would be by priority subject. And then we'll also be finishing up those stakeholder interviews here to get more public input. So in December, this next community meeting is planned, and this would be to get community input on all the items that I just spoke about, including the draft list of recommendations. And depending on where we fall in the process and how we're doing with review of materials, we may schedule a task force meeting to be held before or after that community meeting, just so that we can keep on target with the schedule. Because as you're seeing, it's pretty fast moving and a pretty aggressive schedule. Then moving into January of next year, we discuss the community meeting takeaways. We discuss what alterations we're going to be making to the vision for the township, the priority subject areas, and the recommendations based on that feedback. And then for the next 2 months, we actually start, the task force actually meets with us and starts to review the draft chapters for the priority subjects or the plan chapters. We take a month off in April with no task force meeting while Benny, Mason, and I prepare the plan. And then we meet again with the task force over the next 2 months, May and June, to review the full comp plan document. And then we start the official municipalities planning code review process in July. And that includes that township planning commission meeting I was talking about. In the meantime, in our office, we do background items. We have people proof the document. We give the document to our graphics section to make sure it looks pleasing to the eye and easy to read. Well, you're going through that public process, and then you continue through the municipalities planning code process with review of outside entities, including another part of Chester County Planning Commission, the school district, adjacent municipalities. And adjacent municipalities would include Cecil County, Maryland, since they are adjacent to you. And then in October, and that's month 19 of the contract, then the plan would go to public hearing and adoption by the Board of Supervisors. Are there any questions about the schedule before we move into material?
Well, I have a comment, actually. I'm a little concerned about us not being able to reach out to the Franklin Township residents about the plan. To say we're just going to do a survey. Surveys are usually filled out by people that are angry, rather than getting a real feeling on what people want. And I think that that's a real important thing, a real important piece of what we're doing. I know it's a long process and there's lots of approvals and stuff. So I'd like to hear from other people on the committee what their feeling is about how we might be able to reach out to the people, because I don't want to get, it's a lot of work for all of us to do this. I don't want to get to the end of a 2-year process and somebody says, well, I had no idea you were doing this. So any comments by the rest of the committee?
I think that that's really important, that you get a good balanced demographic, not just the angry people from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Present what's needed. I concur with your concern.
So Jeannie, have you used SurveyMonkey recently in other townships, and what's the response rate?
Well, London Britain's response rate was 30% in the survey. I also want to add a point of clarification. All of the meetings we're having right now are public meetings.
I know, but we don't have a good way to advertise. It's not like people cruise our website.
And people just don't do it. I guess my concern is that, I mean, like London Britain, I said, we've got some very different groups. I mean, we have groups that are farmers, we have people that live in developments, we have our village that we're concerned about, we have different age groups, we have people that are older, people that have young families. And I really want to make sure that we reach out to them. I think that's the most important thing, is to reach out to them and make sure that we have done our job as residents and on this committee to get it done. And I mean, we can do a survey. I mean, they're not all that expensive and stuff, but I don't know. Seeing we can't have a meeting, meetings aren't really well attended either, Zoom or otherwise.
What about the community workshop we talked about here, where all the residents would be invited, property owner residents, and then what about the community meeting?
I guess the point is, how do you invite them?
And how do you make them come?
Well, you can't make anybody come, anyone come to a meeting. But I think one of the things that we might want to do is talk about is, we're going to do an online survey, and we also can do a mailer survey as well, if that is very simple and it's very inexpensive. And there's, all of us are live in a neighborhood somewhere. Take a couple hours and just walk around and knock on your neighbor's door. And I did it when I was running. The first couple of houses are uncomfortable, and then it gets easier. But there's and there's an opportunity there to just say, hey, we're doing this. It's important to us to get you involved. Here's the survey. You'll probably receive one in the mail too. Tell your neighbors to get involved with the process. So, I mean, it's like anything else when you're in a small township when we don't have a media budget, you just have to use your shoe leather and as much as post office and whatnot.
How about Facebook? Joan, can you comment on that? How active is our Facebook page as far as people participating on it?
It's quite often when we put notices on there that people comment between the Facebook and the website, and we do have a email list that we can send information out to individuals and let them know that we will be conducting a survey, or look for the card in the mail, or stop at the office and pick one up, or whatever, to try and get the word out.
How would we do SurveyMonkey if we don't have everyone's email address or phone number? Like how did the other township get the word out?
Well, there's a number of different ways to get the word out. Some municipalities spend the money. West Goshen did this, and they actually sent cards, as Joan was talking about, to every property owner and every resident, for them to go on the township's website to take the survey. Some municipalities actually mail the survey. That is not part of our contract. If you all wanted to do a paper survey, that would be something that we would have to talk further about, because that's not, that's certainly not in a 19-month process by any stretch of the imagination. That's pretty data intensive. Somebody has to enter all those paper forms. So that would be something that we talked about further, but also through community groups, through HOAs, through the Nextdoor app. People reach out people to that. Obviously, easy ones are the township website, the township Facebook page, any kind of neighborhood meetings, any kind of community gatherings. Sometimes businesses will post a flyer. I know that's not really going to work so well during COVID, but
Yeah,
people will
not,
post flyers places to advertise the meetings.
not too many public meetings going on. But I like your idea of a mailed card saying, go to our website. I think we could do a card for maybe with printing and mailing like 50 cents a household or something like that.
Yeah.
So they could go on the website and they could do the survey online.
Yeah, yeah.
That might work. That seems easier as long as it's really user friendly, so everybody can do it.
If you mail the survey like we did last time, I think it's like $1.50 a household, and then you have to do the data entry.
Tally it, yeah.
Yeah, the cards aren't that expensive. So.
Yeah, you don't have such a large population. When West Goshen did that, they have a large population and it got very expensive very quickly, but they have a large population. So, it's a whole different situation.
Right. And we do have some HOAs that might be able to, and some of our developments do have email lists that could send out an email that says, watch for the card, fill out the survey. It's important.
Yeah.
That makes me feel more comfortable because I just feel like just leaving it up to them to find it and do it, we're not going to get the response that we need to get a good feel about what the Franklinites want.
Maybe the township will reinstate its newsletter once a year or something, and we could put a paragraph in there.
Yeah, kick it off with this.
Yeah, that's underway actually, Paul. So that's not a bad idea. I'm not sure when we were planning on publishing the first one, but we could have an accelerated publication plan.
Dave, I was hoping that maybe in the fall, around September, maybe October, we could get a printed version, because by then hopefully we will have our website, and I'm hoping that we can pull a lot off our new website and get something in print and get it out in the mail to the residents. So I think that would help a lot. That was another item Dave and I ran on, that we wanted to reinstate the mailed, what do you call it?
Newsletter.
Flyer. Yeah.
So
communication.
So we're working on it.
I'm trying to get the timeline straight in my head. We're going to do this so in August, we're going to begin the online survey,
Right.
However we do that. So July, we would need to alert people, or do we want to alert people at the beginning of August so they don't sit on it and forget, right? So we want to probably send these cards out when the survey's open, because people will forget if you go too early, they forget. And so that might be something to talk about. I guess we talk about that in July. And it only runs for a month, or does it run for 2 months to September?
It all depends when we get it, when it's ready to go in August. We were anticipating over a month. So maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, I would start it in August and go through September, because I don't know whether people are going to travel this summer or not, but traditionally August is a pretty dead month. So we want to make sure that we're going to September so people are back, kids are going back to school and that sort of thing, and back at home.
Okay.
How it generally works that we found with surveys is the majority of people who are going to fill them out in the first 3 weeks.
Right.
And then there's a couple people here and there that fill them out in the end. But we found, and I'm not saying you shouldn't keep your survey open longer. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that we found that people that are going to respond generally do respond. And then
Are those mailed or online, or both?
online, both.
Both. Do you have surveys that you can provide to the committee so we can take a look at it, so we can kind of pick and choose the questions that we want?
Yeah, we were going to do is, when I worked on the London Britain comp plan years ago, the prior comp plan, we had developed a survey, and London Britain effectively used that same survey again with just a couple changes to the questions. And because that survey was so successful and they got the 30% rate, which by the way is unheard of, usually closer to 10% is a normal rate, and that's considered a good rate of response. We were going to use that as a basis, particularly because you guys are right next door to them. So obviously the questions will be geared to Franklin, but at least the same general gist and how it's phrased and all of that, since it's already been successful. We were going to try that.
They've only got like 14 residents though. That's not fair.
Well, I'd also like to see what their questions are about a village. I mean, I know they have Landenberg, but we have a village as well, and make sure that that's represented the way that we want for the historical committee to keep
They have
that forward.
Stricklersville. Yeah.
No, you said London, Britain, right?
London Britain.
London Britain has Stricklersville.
Yeah, they don't have Landenberg. That's New Garden.
Oh, is that New Garden? I'm sorry. I always thought it was. But we
sounds-
have a village. We actually have two. We have, we have two small villages. So
It sounds like from the focus on the conversation of the survey, I'm not getting a feeling that anybody's thinking a lot of people are going to show up at this community workshop or the community meeting, where we could end up getting a significant amount of.
I don't know about that. I think that we do a good enough job communicating. We'll definitely have people show up. This is a conversation that I had a lot. And so people seem to be very enthusiastic about having a comp plan put in place, and people were really enthusiastic when I talked to them. And so I feel like we could have significant people, a significant amount of people for a public meeting show up. And I think particularly since we're doing this electronically, people, it's a lot easier. So the bar is a little bit lower for them to get out to a meeting, rather than they can just turn on their computer and go. So I'm not really that concerned. I think that we should be able to get some presence.
Okay.
But
Is
we just have to
move on now to the. Is everybody okay with moving on, or are there any other questions about the schedule?
well, just one thing. So you're going to provide us with the survey that you used before?
We're going to provide you with a draft survey. We're not
Right.
going to provide you with the survey we used before. We'll provide you with a draft with questions, and that's what we'll be talking about next month
Okay.
in part.
Janine, did we want to talk about possibly rescheduling November and December now, or do you want to wait until later?
We can talk about it now if you would like. Joan brought up that the November 2020 and the December 2020 meetings, because we're meeting on the 4th week of the month, are going to interfere with holidays. And so we wanted to talk about the possibility of what other dates in November and December might work best for you all, rather than the 4th Tuesday. Perhaps a 3rd Tuesday, or
What does that look like on the calendar? It's Thanksgiving. How about you just pick a
It's
week?
scheduled for Thanksgiving week and Christmas week, and I thought with people traveling, it might not be a good time to have a meeting.
Yeah, just pick the week before the holidays.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah, that works for me too.
we could do the 17th of November, for example,
Sure.
Yep.
and then in December do the 15th.
Yep.
Yeah, that works.
Mason, does that work with you?
Janine, do the December date again, please.
15.
15th.
Isn't that a Tuesday?
That's
Yes.
today.
Okay. All right, 17. All right, thank you.
It's the 3rd, though, the 3rd Tuesday, not the 4th Tuesday.
Okay.
So then moving into our next agenda item, we're going to talk about the table of contents for the plan. And I just want you to look at this quickly because, as I said before, it definitely looks different than your current plan. So I don't want anybody to be confused by that as we're going along and then decide, it's a problem after we've already gotten into it. So here's the table of contents. Can you all see the table of contents on my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
So as I said, we're going to start with the introductory chapter, which you have tonight. Then we're going to go into the community profile, which looks at the regional area and also looks at the demographic characteristics. Then next month, we'll look at existing conditions. And you see them listed here, a variety of existing conditions. And remember, this is supposed to be a summary of information and not going into detail ad nauseum about the information, because the key is to get into the priorities and recommendation chapters, starting with chapter 4. And then moving through these chapters. We're not sure how many there's going to be for priorities and recommendations, but we're anticipating it's likely there'll be 4 to 6. That's what the contract term is, at least. We're thinking that there might be a chapter on township services, and there will definitely be a chapter on future land use and housing. And that will talk a little bit about developable lands also, which you've already talked. The township's already worked with Chris Patriarca in my office on the fair share analysis, and that got into developable lands a bit. Then we're going to move into implementation, and this is where you have a summary of all your recommendations. This can either be phrased, you don't have to make this decision now, but this can either be put as a chapter or this can be put as another appendix. Some municipalities like to have it as its own chapter so it doesn't get lost as an afterthought in an appendix. Some municipalities like it to be in appendices. For right now, we just have it listed as its own chapter. Then we have a couple appendices, and you see Appendix C is the community survey results. So they'll be listed here. And Appendix A, Appendix B are if needed. And then Appendix D would be larger format maps in case you want larger format maps than or what you're seeing in the chapters themselves. Are there any questions about the format before we go on? So let's look at draft chapter 1. And this again is the introduction chapter. So basically we go through and talk about what the purpose of a comprehensive plan is. And if you all have any comments about the wording on this, now would be the time to express those comments so we can make the changes now, since we'll be moving through materials pretty quickly every month. So chapter 1, we go through in a couple paragraphs what the purpose of a comprehensive plan is, the fact your current comprehensive plan was adopted in 2006 and updated in 2009 for the trail feasibility study. Then we move on to what comprehensive planning in Pennsylvania means, and that's when we reference the municipality's planning code as the state enabling legislation that allows comprehensive planning to occur in municipalities. We do a summary of the planning process that took place for updating this comprehensive plan. We'll have to revise this because I think we have a different size task force now. And then we'll revise this as we go through. This is just a draft list of what we propose are going to be the public outreach events and when the public outreach events are going to be happening.
I have a kind of probably a dumb question. What is a stakeholder interview? I'm sorry, I don't understand what that is.
So in going through the schedule and also through the contract, our office had proposed that we have the task force select key people who perhaps aren't on the task force, but who may have key opinions on different items in the township that would be influential in the comprehensive plan process. So for example, in another community I worked in, there were a couple large employers who were not on the task force, and they were identified as people who should be interviewed, and they became stakeholders to be interviewed because how their business ran in the municipality made a big difference in terms of jobs in the municipality, tax base in the municipality, etc. Other municipalities I've worked in have had places of worship that have been very influential in the community, and so somebody from the place of worship would be interviewed because the place of worship effectively served as a community center for the municipality. So it's up to the task force to choose other stakeholders, up to 8, who are not currently on the task force, who might be individuals that really have an influence just in and of themselves on the township, the future of the township, and or people maybe who aren't on the task force that have had experience planning in the township, past planning commission members, past supervisors that have an incredible knowledge base and institutional history about how things are in the township and could provide additional insights into this process.
Well, for example, could we have a stakeholder? I know we have Dave Hocking on there, but for farmers, I'm interested to make sure that farmers' rights get represented in the plan. So that would be a stakeholder that I would be interested in. So how would we do that? We could interview maybe Dave could help us, and we could do farmers in general. I just want to make sure that they have a large voice, because they're a large piece of what we are here, actually.
Well, how that would work is the task force would identify 8 people. So I'm just making up numbers right now. If farmers have a large percentage of the population, then 4 of those 8 people would be farmers, for example. And we would contact the farmers and ask everybody specific questions to interview them to provide input in the comprehensive plan process.
So would the process be that we would identify, so we're gonna have a survey to ask everybody.
Right.
And these stakeholders would be people we wanna make sure take the survey?
No, they get interviewed.
They get interviewed on top of taking the survey. So for example, if the task force has 10 very specific farming related questions, all those farming related questions probably wouldn't make it in a survey, because as we were saying before, you have to keep the survey specific, but also easy to use enough that people are going to want to take the survey. But if there's some very specific, very important questions about farming in the township, then those types of questions could be asked of stakeholders in stakeholder interviews to really get into maybe more specific topic areas and more specific details.
I see. So the process would be, we would come up with a series of important questions. Oh, we do have we have a series of questions for farmers, make sure that they are represented. So this task force should identify farmers. We're not necessarily going, because I don't think we have, too many large employers in this township.
Right.
So if I could jump in a second, for a good example could be, even though I know they're not technically in the township, your fire service, the school district, people who would bring a subset of knowledge about your residents that you might not have because you're focused on, you've been a farmer for 20 years and you don't really know that much about the fire service or the trash service or whatever it may be. So while it would be good to talk to a farmer, I think also, like I see here, I've written down, we have HARB, we have Parks and Rec, we have planning, we have horse farmer, town supervisor, but there's no one from the school district. So if someone could point in the direction of, the head of the school district or a principal for Avongrove, that would be someone who might, and maybe they don't have that much to add. They might not have some amazing revelation, but they could. I'm working on the Tredyffrin plan right now, and something that was brought up was Tredyffrin obviously is a very well-off township, and their biggest problem is they can't attract young firefighters because no one can afford to live there. So that's a huge issue that they're facing as a fire department, that we and the task force, when we brought it to them, they're like, oh, we didn't even think of that. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking for, I think. I might be overstepping, Janine, but I think that's pretty.
So maybe each of us bring in a half a dozen or so names and we talk about them, and then
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Could I make a suggestion that rather than calling them stakeholders, we're trying to make this understandable to the public, that we say interviews were held with A, B, and C in the township to get some background, or expand on this just a little bit.
Yep.
Right, and we will refine it, as it says here. The list will be adjusted as needed. We're just leaving it termed this for now, because we
Right,
don't know
all
what-
I'm saying is if we're going to interview, say, women in the township, of farmers or what have you, and fire chiefs, we list those so people know who the stakeholders that we talk to are.
Right. Right, so as a committee, then we should all come up with some ideas about who we might want to put in on that list. Is that what we're agreeing to?
I think so.
Okay,
Unless anyone has an, yeah.
all right, well, that clears that up. All right, good.
And I think that might become more evident once we start talking a little bit about those critical subject areas. If
Mhm.
you say one of your critical subject areas, one of the critical subject areas in London, Britain, as you guys probably already know, is internet service and any kind of communication service. So for somebody like London, Britain, a stakeholder, although London, Britain did not do a stakeholder interview process, but a stakeholder might be talking to Comcast or Verizon sort of thing to try to figure out how to get them to run lines in the township. So I think these stakeholders also become more evident as discussion starts moving on.
Yep.
Issues you're identifying that this task force doesn't have the knowledge base to address.
Yeah, I think it's getting hung up on the language of what we're calling these folks.
Right. And
Right.
again, this is
'Cause
just
it's-
generic language at this point
Yeah.
because we don't know yet. So we're just leaving it as very generic at this point until we know, and then that can be further refined.
We'll call them the important people.
Right. There's, oh,
You guys are important people.
The Council of Elders.
People we want to keep.
So moving on to just finish going through this chapter quickly, we took the liberty of developing a vision statement for the township, and we wanted to talk to you about this vision statement. We based this on your current comprehensive plan and what I know in Karen Marshall is my colleague in historic resources, and I know she's been working with the township a bit on the village situation and some village enhancements. So that and just our general knowledge of Southern Chester County. But again, we took a shot at this and we wanted you all to give us feedback on if what I'm highlighting here sounds the least bit right and correct for what your overall vision for the next 10 years would be, to summarize the goals and where the township is headed for its future, again, over the next 10 years. Because this plan is for approximately 10 years into the future.
As a first read, it looks really good. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, it looks good. I mean, one thing we learned from doing the comprehensive plan before and talking to other people, planners like yourself, we're out of the path of growth, which is a good thing. So we can retain our rural atmosphere without the pressure of, of development and that sort of thing, like around the Route 1 corridor and that sort of thing. So I think it's great.
Does anybody else want to chime in? I'm sorry, Bear.
The land and the sustainable use of that land, I think, is a critical part of not just Franklin, but in general, what we need to be facing. And so I like seeing that in the statement.
Does anybody else want to weigh in, or can we?
I would like to see quality of life to be the first of the three. I think that's the key that we're trying to provide is quality of life as opposed to anything. Those I just think that's number one.
So basically moving that up here.
Yes.
I didn't know how to say this in there, but one of my concerns is with climate change, we're going to have to really be mindful of the potential impacts and how we maintain the livability of the township if we do get more serious storms in the future. So I didn't know how to say it, but that's one of my concerns in terms of going forward, and it fits perhaps better in the land use area.
Resilient.
Resilience of the ecosystem is critical, absolutely. Locally as well as globally, but it starts locally. So that ecosystem that we have here, that balance of wildlife and people, I haven't seen a lot of places that have been able to achieve that.
Anybody else want to add? We'll work on the wordsmithing. We're just looking for the concepts. Okay, I'm not hearing anything else, so we will move on to the end of this chapter. And so this just gives, I'm not going to go through here in any detail, but this just gives for somebody reading this comprehensive plan, it gives them just a quick overview on how to use the comprehensive plan. And it's exactly what we've already talked about: background, priorities, recommendations, implementation in that chapter 9, and then the appendices as background information. So then moving on to the chapter 2. So chapter 2 provides the community profile. And again, this goes through the regional discussion, and then it also looks at demographics. So we just provide a quick overview of what this chapter is one of your background chapters. And then we look at the local and regional setting. We talk about your place in the region, how you have a proximity, unlike other places in the county, to 2 different states, particularly Maryland, and how you have a relationship with Southern Chester County. Then when we're talking about a regional discussion, because the municipality's planning code has a section where you look at adjacent communities, and that's a requirement of the municipality's planning code. We did the same thing here. So we called the adjacent communities in Chester County your region for the purposes of this discussion. And then we move on into talking about the road system on this page, where we talk about there's really no major transportation arteries. 896 is really your major transportation artery, followed by 841. And both of those lead to more major arteries such as Route 1 and eventually to 95 and 41. And then we also were really impressed on the website by the various parks and preserves in the township and the level of detail and mapping that you already have available for the community. And so we just chose one of those graphics, as you're seeing here, the Middle Branch Trail, to show what wonderful resources you have available to you and how the township has worked very hard to have those resources available to you. And we list the different preserves and the park, and then the adjacent White Clay Creek, and then also talking about some of the water resources that are available, some of the other nearby trails, not in the township, but nearby. And then also talking about Fair Hill, obviously in the southern portion of the township. Are there any other, we're going to have a section in existing conditions talking about community facilities, but for the purposes of regional context, are there any other community facilities that, or other items that should be pointed out in this section that we haven't captured in the write-up that we did?
Can you scroll up? I want to see if you got Crossing Park on there. That's our main feature is Crossing Park.
Yes. Crossing Park's right here.
I was looking on the map, but yeah, it's not on the map. You're right.
Oh, no, it's not on the map. It will be shown in the existing conditions when we
Right.
do the mapping for the.
Yeah, you're missing some
Park.
trails on that map. Okay.
There's also a large amount of the township that is actually, I believe, PA state owned. Is that correct?
Yep. Yes.
And so is that represented on the map or no?
This map was just shown as an example of a trail system that you have in the
Yeah, it's just
township.
that's
Again,
just a small section of the township there.
yeah, it's just
my
shown
my apologies for that, but I guess there is a large percentage of the acreage that is actually owned by the PA, the state of PA. Is that correct?
yes.
Yeah, so maybe that's a resource or something that should be noted.
Okay. Other than we note the northern portion of the Fair Hill
Yeah.
natural resource area, and that's owned by PA.
Yeah.
No, the northern portion of the Fair Hill Fair Hill is Maryland, all right, and White Clay, they call it the White Clay, part of the White Clay Preserve is Pennsylvania.
Isn't it called
It's all part of the Willie DuPont Farm, but it's not called Fair Hill in Pennsylvania.
Okay, what's it called? Because I thought the London Britain portion is called White Clay Preserve. What's the
Well,
northern?
it is because
Oh.
White Clay in Pennsylvania, they have the Pennsylvania and the Delaware side. And so over on the adjacent to Fair Hill, it's still part of, correct me if I'm not right, Paul, but it's part of White Clay.
It's
right?
like White Clay
It's called
Creek.
the Big Elk something.
I thought it was White Clay Creek, White Clay Annex or something like that. I don't know.
I don't know. I have to look on their website. I thought it was called Big Elk White. It's kind of like two watersheds. It didn't make very
Right.
big sense, but it's not part of Fair Hill. It used to be when Willie DuPont owned it, but it's not anymore.
It's not contiguous with White Clay Preserve, but it's
Yeah.
the same name.
Do they call that the Strawbridge property?
Yes.
Yeah, right. But what do they call it now, Dave? I mean,
I'm
it's
not real sure.
I
Yeah,
believe, if
but
I
it's
may jump
huge.
in,
It's called White Clay. It's part of the White Clay Preserve actually is the people that are in charge of it. So they say the White Clay Preserve at the Big Elk or something, which is kind of dumb because it's two different streams and watersheds.
Nan,
Yeah,
I believe it's called the Big Elk section of the
Of the
White
White-
Clay Creek Preserve.
thank you, Paul. Right, that sounds right. It doesn't make much sense, but that's correct. And also with also the roads, because I live on Appleton Road, but that's not why I bring it up. But I don't know if we want to mention it in the comprehensive plan because Appleton Road is becoming a very busy road going between 896 and the 273. There's lots of trucks and that sort of thing. I don't know if it should be mentioned in that because it will be a problem someday. For the 25 years I've lived here, it's gone from a sleepy road to something that's pretty busy.
Well, I think we'll get into that more when we do existing conditions. This is
Right.
really just to be a regional, unless it's a regional road like
State
841,
road. It's a state road.
896.
It's a state road. Appleton is a state road.
Right, there's a lot of state roads, but would you actually consider it a regional connecting road? Like of the likes of 896, or is it more of a local busy road?
It's getting pretty close. It's getting pretty close. When I'm out there mowing, I mean, it's pretty close. So a lot of truckers take it because they can cut out the toll on I-95. So they cut down that way from Lancaster, which is, it used to be part of the Great Road, which is, but anyways, I just wanted to bring that up. But are we going to
Is it
do
more of the ilk of the level of 841 then? Because we have 841 is also a significant route. Is that more what Appleton Road is?
No.
I don't know, maybe Dave can talk about it because he lives on 841.
No, just go ahead, Dave.
It's pretty busy, Paul, actually.
I know. I was just gonna say, if you look at the road traffic,
Especially at quitting time,
Yeah, right.
school buses, all that.
So it's a it's a commuter, connector, if that's what you want to talk about that. But anyways, I just wanted to bring that up.
So it's a
If you
commuter
go on
connector
Google-
past the township.
Yeah.
If you go on Google Maps, it shows taking Appleton Road to get to Newark from our place on 896.
Yeah,
So, that adds to it.
it's busy, I can tell you
Yep.
that. So I don't know, and I think in the comprehensive plan, it should at least be mentioned as something that might need to be looked in the future. So with the trail map, are we also going to do like lands that are have public access that would show the Strawbridge property or the?
Yeah, this map was just meant to be representative for a regional map from your website. This isn't meant to be anything more than just an example.
But
When
you
we
have
get to the
some
existing-
preserves. You have some preserves. Could you put the Strawbridge property on there, which is now preserved and owned by the state?
it's not shown in the map, man. That's just the northern section of the township.
Yeah,
But I
we
mean,
can
you could
remove
do
this
a whole
map if
map
it
of
sounds
the-
like it's causing confusion. So we can
Yeah.
remove this map. When you get to existing conditions chapter, there'll be plenty of mapping in there. Again, this is just a very regional brief chapter. So the map's meant to have an illustration of what the township is currently doing and some of the preserves and elements that are being discussed here. It isn't meant to be anything more than that. So, but it sounds like to remove the confusion's sake, I think taking the map out of this chapter would be a better idea.
Especially since it's the first map we see, and some of us love maps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
a
well, so when you remove it, I think the question would be what we can have a map there. I like the idea of having a map there. We just can decide what map we want there.
well, I think just a proper caption under this map. It's a darn good map because I made it. So, so just a
Paul
caption
Overton map.
explaining what it is, though, explaining that it's not a township map, it's a map of past projects or regional connectors or something.
Okay.
We can say we can put a caption on it saying it's an example of regional connectors, something like that.
Excuse me for speaking out of turn again, but I'd like to point out that we don't have the northern portion of the Big Elk section. We have a large portion. So northern is wrong in your yellow area there, Janine.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll shut up.
Well, we're
Oh yeah,
supposed
I
to
just
be,
put northern portion because that's what I had before. Sorry.
we're
Yeah,
supposed to
it's
be
just called the
pairing,
Big Elk, right? It's the Big Elk section of the White Clay Creek Preserve.
Yes.
Actually,
we're supposed to be paring
no,
everything
it's
down,
a large
right?
portion. It's bigger than the township section.
So this is the correct name right here? Big Elk section of the White Clay Creek Preserve?
Yes, that's the
Okay.
name. That's the name of what we refer to as the Strawbridge property.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure that we have that correct. Okay. So moving on, now we've skipped a whole page. So here we get into the regional settings map. And this is where we look at the much, much larger picture. And as you're seeing from the legend, we're looking at the surrounding communities. We're looking at things like airports down here in Maryland. We're looking at fire and police stations through this sort of legend item. We're looking at hospitals and colleges and universities. And then all these little tiny dots are other types of cultural institutions, whether they're schools or they're places of worship or they're other public buildings, just to give a feel for what surrounds Franklin. And I think this regional context map is very interesting because you really see that Franklin is still a rural township. When you look at, you get to look down here, or you look up here and you see the various community facilities or regional facilities that are available. They just aren't in Franklin. So I think it provides a nice perspective to show your rural setting.
We're a bedroom community.
So
Would it be appropriate for us to shift the center of that so that, let's see, so that we see more to the east?
if you want to, we can. Then everything, well, clearly we have to show at least the edge of Elk.
Sure.
Because that's your region, but we can. You're going to
But-
show probably Kennett and a little bit of Pennsbury Township if we go further to the east, unless we zoom out. And then you start to lose
Yeah, no, I like,
ability.
yeah, I was kind of asking everybody. I just know that, I don't know, on my side of the township, we go to Delaware all the time, rarely ever west. So most of all the functions that we do are to the east. I was just posing a question.
No, I would concur with that. We rarely head west. We always head east. Wilmington, Philly, the areas there, Newark.
But I would include Oxford. I'm a little different. I actually go to Oxford a fair amount, to tell you the truth. So I wouldn't cut Oxford out of it. You can move it, but move it over a little bit.
We can move it over, but if we move it over a little bit, unless we scale out significantly, we're certainly not going to catch Wilmington or Philadelphia.
Yeah,
You move it over a little bit, we'll catch Pennsbury. Here's a portion of Pennsbury, so we'll catch more of Pennsbury.
But you have Hockessin on there. I go to Hockessin. I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
talking for myself. I mean, I do go to Oxford a fair amount, but
Yeah, here's Hockessin, and this is Newark.
Yeah, I go to Newark, obviously.
But obviously it doesn't go all the way over to Wilmington, which would be over here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess having it centered, having Franklin centered would be the most appropriate.
I agree.
I would-
Leave it centered.
Okay, we'll leave that alone for now. And then moving on,
The dog agrees.
the dog likes it. So a brief history. I already talked to, oh, I'm sorry, go on.
So Paul and I talked about it, and he has written, he's here online with us, so he can unmute himself, so he can speak himself. But we talked about it, and there's lots of history written up. And you mentioned that you wanted it to be about a page long, and he said that he can, edit it to whatever you want. So just why don't you go over what you're looking for?
Okay, we just grabbed this quickly off the township website, basically. And we're looking for this to be salient points of the township's history, but without getting into any more detail than, for example, the regional, settings write-up is, because obviously this isn't a township history. This is just supposed to be important points of what happened in the township's past and how you got, to be the township you are today based on that history. So that's why we were thinking more of a page, including that map, so that it gives more detail, but it's not overwhelming, in the chapter.
Okay, well, we can do that. When do you want it?
If you could get it to us, would it be reasonable by mid-July
Yeah, that
or
can
our
be
next
done.
meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're looking at using that map, how much of the page are you looking to occupy with that map?
Well, we don't necessarily have to use this map if you have one that's better. This is a map.
This is the one that's perhaps the most colorful.
So
There,
I zoomed
the
out
only
so
other
you can
option,
see.
the only other good option is the 1873 Whitmer map, which you may have seen versions of for other townships. There's nothing, comparable otherwise. And I'm trying to figure out, looking at this, if, just how, I mean, I can write to any length. I just need to know roughly what length I'm writing to. I'm an editor and a writer by profession.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Then
And
I
I'm
would
used to
say,
writing short entry encyclopedia entries, so
okay,
I'm suited for this.
I would say replace this paragraph if you feel it's needed to be replaced. And then I would say write maybe one more paragraph here and maybe one more paragraph of the same length here.
Okay, so you want basically,
three
if I
paragraphs.
reduce about 3 paragraphs, roughly the size of the existing paragraph.
Yes,
That
roughly
would-
the size of the existing paragraph.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Paul, an observation, it says what township we broke away from, but shows the other township.
We don't get the choice of maps. This is the way that they were done by Brio and Whitmer. We would need 2 maps to show that. So
Or-
outside of importing a smaller map with less detail, which is also possible.
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, your point's well taken.
Okay.
So then moving on to, so then we go through, we had the township history. So now we go through the planning history and talk about the planning history in the township. We wrote these paragraphs, and then we didn't know if you have anything else that you would like to add. There's not much information out there, even in the current comprehensive plan, about planning history in the township. We did note that the current comp plan talks about that the Planning Commission was reestablished in 2004, presumably meaning that it was disbanded prior to that. So we did capture that here. But if you have something else you would like us to add in this section, if there's other planning elements that are important Obviously, we're not rating, a tome here, but anything else that are important points to capture.
So, Paul, would this be a place where we kind of talk about we had a master trail plan that we were thinking about, connecting the various
Well,
different concepts? Would that be in here?
She mentioned that as that was the amendment to the 2006 plan. It was done
The
in
trail
2001.
feasibility? Okay.
Yeah, trail
Yeah, you
feasibility.
already did that.
Okay.
But
It's
sure,
right here.
there it is.
There it is. Yep.
But
okay, because that's one of the things I think was important to me, part of this. So
we've preserved a lot of the township in the meantime, and we've had some missteps in our fair share, I could say, but I don't want to write that down. So we need to, how about we need to evaluate our fair share? Is that in here? What's the proper term? I'm not using the proper term.
I probably wouldn't get into that level of detail. I mean, that's really specific.
Okay.
This is just capturing, we're capturing here the adoption of the comprehensive plan.
Well, I think we should comment on our population. It's I don't know, we've added like 50% more people since.
That's the whole next section of this chapter.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll get in there. This is really just the history of planning in the township. So for example, another township might say in 2006, we adopted a comprehensive plan. 2009, we adopted the amendment. 2010, we did a master plan for a park. 2014, we updated our zoning ordinance. 2016, we created a historic commission or a historic committee. 2018, we created a sustainability committee. So it might be a history of planning in the township of that variety is what you would want to get to here, really big picture items, major items. So for example, when was the historical committee created? Was that created since the last comp plan? Since 2006?
Waiting for Paul to unmute and tell us.
No. The Historical Commission, I think the original ordinance might be 2002, if I recall correctly. Certainly by 2004, we were doing the Historic Resource Survey and had completed it. So without, calling up the ordinance itself, which I can sort of do here.
How about the Parks and Recreation Committee?
Yeah, that was established this year, 2020, reestablished.
It's different than the open space committee.
Park, Rec, and Open Space.
So Historic Commission ordinance is 2002.
Oops.
So when I've been working on the existing conditions chapter, which is for next meeting. I got a bit into the stormwater, and I think I noticed there was some stormwater management amendments that had happened recently. You revamped that entire process. Is that correct?
That's true. That was a state requirement or county.
Yeah, yeah, that's.
What was that called, Chuck? We were responding to.
Yeah, everybody in the county had to.
Everybody in the state had to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't really write that. We just adopted it because the county said we had to.
It's like a couple years ago, you had to amend floodplain. Everybody had to do that too.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah, these would really. I think this is good though. Saying you added the Parks and Rec committee, you have the historic committee. When did we create the HARB? I actually years ago. I think Bob Weiss did that project for you.
Yeah.
And I actually monitored that grant years ago and worked with you guys doing that ordinance.
I would add that that's for Campbellsville, historic character of Campbellsville. Because HARB is not throughout township wide, it's limited to Campbellsville.
Okay. But the historic commission is township wide.
No. Oh, the commission is, yeah,
Yeah, the commission is.
but Harb is not.
Snack or anything?
Okay, thank you for that input. So we will now move on. We wrote a section about landscapes 3 that I referenced in the. There's a lot of noise going on in the background. Can everybody else hear that? Or,
Not me.
okay, it sounds like a television or something. So we wrote a bit on Chester County Landscapes 3, which we referenced in the contract. So you can see in Landscapes 3 in this livable landscapes map, this color right here, this tannish color, is showing the township as mainly a rural landscape. And then this yellow color shows where there's suburban areas. The green overlay shows where there's natural resources. Then this purple area shows where there is an overlay that we called significant historic landscapes, and that captures your National Register Historic District in the village. And then we just show the surrounding, as we showed before, we show generally the surrounding region, so you can see how you fare in the surrounding region. And for the most part, obviously east of you and west of you, it has remained very rural, and even somewhat portions to the northwest of you have remained rural. And then obviously when you're getting north of you, you're starting to get into suburban and much more growth. So we did a description of that here in the text, talking about landscapes 3. And then we go through a description of the adjoining communities. Once we have the future land use designations done for the township, excuse me, this information will be updated. So for right now, it mainly looks at Franklin's existing land use compared to the other communities. I don't know if you have any edits or changes we should make to this. I grab some water.
I think under New London, they got a big chunk of the Strawbridge property. If you want to add about conserved acres in there. I don't know how much they got.
I think we have here, well, we're only looking at what's abutting you. This is supposed to be an analysis of adjoining communities. This is a municipalities planning code analysis.
Right.
So we're really looking at the border areas right
Okay.
along Franklin's border and whether the land use is consistent with the land uses in Franklin.
Well, I just was saying that because you mentioned that Elk, so the Strawbridge property is in Franklin, Elk, and in New London as well. So
Okay.
looking, because it's all connected.
Is that what we have here though in New London?
I don't know how much is in New London, but it's all that White Clay Creek, Big Elk Preserve.
Right. I think we've covered that here in saying we protected over 150 acres have been protected in natural resources.
Okay, I didn't know whether that was other preserves or whether that was the
Okay.
land.
We can certainly look into how that was preserved, if it's homeowner association or
Well, I
other.
just think it's important because it's all contiguous, because it was all one property. It was all the Willie DuPont farm, and then George Strawbridge bought it.
Right.
So even though it goes between different municipalities, it really is one entity. It's this one big, huge chunk of land that he owned, and it's all contiguous.
Okay, well, we'll just double check to see if what we're referencing here in the 150
Okay, that
is
sounds
all
good.
HOA or it's also the Strawbridge property. So then moving on, we also go through Cecil County's land use, obviously, because they do abut you all. Now is when we get into the demographic characteristics. So we looked at population. And I just want to throw out a caveat here. A lot of the data that we're using here is from the census between 10-year census periods, and it's called the American Community Survey. And the Bureau of the Census does a survey every single year, but it's not of the whole population. It's of a random percentage of the population. So there are statistical errors in it, certainly. We try to use the data that's over the 5-year estimated period. And what that is it takes the 1-year data over a 5-year time period and then estimates it to try to give a better perspective rather than the very small sample that's gotten every year. It's the sample over 5 years. But even so, just a caveat, you're going to see maybe some inconsistencies in data, but it's the best information that we have to do this analysis. So bear with that when we're going through this data, that it's not perfect, but there is nothing that we have that's better at this point. And we have a note in here saying that when we get the new census information and or the new 2019 American Community Survey information, then some of this information will be updated. We just don't have that information yet. So the bottom line is that for the population growth, as you read, I'm sure, between 1970 and 2000, the township really experienced a boom in population. And that's your most significant growth years. And in particular, when we scroll down to this page, 1970 to 1980 really was when you had the most amount of growth in a single decade, where there was over 80% increase of population in that single decade. We also looked at density just to compare Franklin to the density of Chester County for analytical purposes. So we chose a couple key years. So we started in 1940 and said that Franklin's population was about 50 people per square mile. And then we looked years later and said it had grown to 3 times in terms of density, 145 persons per square mile. And then again in 2010, it had over doubled and you were at 330 persons per square mile. And we did a comparison to that with the county, so you could just see where you fare, with the county. And still in 2010, Franklin's at 330 persons per square mile and the county's at double that, at 600 persons per square mile. But it's an interesting analysis to see in 1940, Franklin was at 50 and the county was at 179. So in proportion, well, Franklin's half of what the county was. It was less than a third in terms of density of what the county was in 1940. So proportionally, it's definitely become, more dense.
But the county, you're counting like Westchester and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's,
We're just looking at we're trying to just give you a general perspective of where you sit in terms of, being a rural community.
So I'm a little confused. So we did a big push with open space over the last 15 years. So we slowed down what was going to be a line on your chart that would have been skyrocketing. And I think that in the verbiage here, it kind of doesn't show that, of the work that we've done with the open space. So, because I don't want the residents to be disappointed because they invested their tax dollars in preserving a good portion of Franklin Township. So I don't really understand the numbers. It doesn't seem to make sense. Paul Overton can.
yeah, it does. If you look at the purple line from 2000 to 2010, it slows compared.
Yeah, I see that. I see that. But in the numbers, it kind of looks like we still kind of took off.
I wasn't reading. I was just looking at the chart.
Yeah, I agree. I was happy with the chart, but it just seems like.
And then, we didn't stop in 2010. When she gets the next 5 years in there, that will also show an even flatter line.
Right. Because that's important to us because, this is a document for the people of Franklin Township. And again, I want them to understand that the money they invested in the open space program was successful. And I'm not sure this section really shows that. So
We do say here growth was lesser. I mean, we can only go with the data that's, available. We do say growth was lesser from 2000 to 2010 and then 2010 to 2017. And then we say, 500 persons.
So can you extend the chart to 2017?
I think we should wait till the 2020 data is available because this,
Yeah.
are you talking about this?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. When the data is available. Yeah.
I think it's better when the data is available because I feel like the chart would be comparing decennial census data to then the American Community Survey data. And I think that's very misleading.
Yep. Okay.
So, but we, we do say in text that it slowed, but certainly there was still, growth of 500 persons between 2000 and 2010. And considering your population isn't that large in the first place, but it's around 4,000 people, 500 people is still, 3,800 people and 4,300. So 500 people is still a good amount of growth overall.
What about housing? Could you have numbers for houses? Are we going to look at that later?
Yeah. If you read the material we sent, it's later in the material.
I saw it's later, but I mean,
Yeah.
so that might be more of a show of what we did, which is we reduced the number of houses rather than people.
So another way to look at it is if there's projections, right? If you can project what you would have done if we had done nothing, right? What was the projection before you did the preservation, and then where did we end up, right? If we want to analyze population growth.
We would have looked like New Garden, the blue line.
Yeah. Because it's also how did the rate of change, right? So it's not absolute numbers, it's what's the rate of change. And so this is the absolute number, and how does the rate of change over time?
Right. And you're seeing that, I think, in this graphic.
Yeah.
You're seeing where the number is going flat.
Right.
And you're seeing in the text when we say from 1970 to 1980, the growth was over 80%, but then the next 2 decades, meaning 1980 to 90 and then 90 to 2000, you're seeing half the growth rate in each decade. So in each of those decades, it was 40%.
Right. So
which means it was starting to slow at that point, but
the impact is seen because we're flattening the line here, whereas New Garden, by example, is a linear growth.
right. And then even if you compare, if you look at 1970, as we've written here, to 2000, you're seeing around, we'll just round and say 1,000 persons per decade. And then if you read the text, in this decade, then you have really half the number of persons, which is 500 people. So I think it is saying there was a slowing.
Oh,
I don't know if it's saying it as overtly as you want it to be saying it.
No, it's, I mean,
could add.
The rate of change from 90 to 2000 is much higher than what happened from 2000 to 2010.
Yes.
That is
Let's get the 2020 data before you wordsmith everything.
Okay, and then we can change it.
Yeah.
When do you think we'll have that information? Do they have any idea?
No, they're still collecting data right now. So the census is still collecting data. So no.
I'm sure the virus will put them behind schedule.
So moving on to population forecasts, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission does do these forecasts. And granted, they are forecasts based on various factors. So they have a certain level of accuracy and a certain level of inaccuracy. And as you're seeing, the base year that they were, or the year they did the forecasts, the last time they did them was 2016. And so they had forecasted, and again, when the 2020 census data is available, then this will all change a bit. But there was a forecast of around 44% growth for Franklin through 2045. And then over that same period, DVRPC had forecasted that Chester County was going to be growing about 28% over the same period. But so we say here, when the census data is available, then we'll know a little bit better how that's really faring, and if the forecasts are in fact accurate, or if they're too much or too little. So I don't think we should put too much weight on those at the moment, just as a general idea of where the forecasts say the township is headed. So then we look at age, and the age cohorts basically reflect Chester County in terms of where the largest groupings are, with the exception of the county definitely has a higher percentage of over 65 than the township does. The township has a pretty low percentage of over 65. So it's a relatively young township when you just look at the age groupings overall. And then population diversity. You're seeing the numbers. Chester County's around 85% Caucasian, and the township is around 98% Caucasian. So neither are particularly diverse, but obviously Franklin less so than the county overall. Moving on to education, the township is definitely an educated population. And between 2000 and then those 2017 estimates, the township has increased in higher levels of education, namely bachelor's and graduate degrees. The county has also shown an increase, as you're seeing here, but the township has shown a greater increase proportionally in those levels of education.
Can I ask if we can go back up
Sure.
to the diversity section?
Uh-huh.
Do we need to show that?
You don't need to, unless you,
Is there a reason not to show it?
No reason not to show it. I don't know what the reason to show it is.
I suppose it would be no different than showing the age of people or their education level. It's just another data point.
some municipalities like to show it because particularly for the Latino community, whether translation services or other types of services are needed, if there's, a larger population, sometimes that helps inform them for a planning process or for comprehensive planning recommendations. But that's been my primary experience why municipalities, like to show this particular graphic.
I just can't see how that relates to our planning.
How does everybody else feel about it? In, out?
Well, can we hold and see what type of questions we create, what our priorities are, and then come back and revisit this? Because I agree, if it's just so one-sided, what's it really speaking to? Unless it's addressing one of our needs.
Okay, we will just leave it sit here for now.
Okay.
We'll circle back to it if we need to later. And then moving on to income, showing both persons below the poverty level and then median income. Franklin from 2000 to 2017, the median income definitely increased. And as you're seeing in the region, Franklin definitely has a high median income compared to some of the other communities. We were curious about this number from 2000 to 2017. When you look over that 17-year period, when you're comparing the other communities in the region and Chester County in general, the poverty numbers significantly increased in Franklin. And we were wondering if anybody had any insight into what that increase might have been related to.
I was going to say we built a low income housing on Gypsy Hill Road, maybe, but that's not appropriate for me to say that. I don't know if that's true. That's
What, the apartments?
yeah.
I don't think low income, is it?
No, but compared to a 100-acre farm that in 2000, it was big plots and big estates, and then.
But would
No,
that
it was
count
there
for?
in 2000. I think it's been there for a long time.
Yeah, it's been there. That was there long before.
It's been there before 2000.
All right, so
George Thorogood lived in that one, in there, so that's how old it is.
Awesome.
bad guess. Who lived in there?
George
Thorogood.
You're talking about 200 people, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was there before 2000.
I don't know.
So you're talking about this change in number, this percentage. It seems radical, but it's a few hundred people. So it may just be I don't know. I don't know where you got that data even, actually, from the U.S. Census.
Yeah, this is, remember I told you about the American Community Survey estimates?
A few hundred people is pretty fine granularity for the accuracy of that census.
So we'll just leave the write-up as is then for now. We just wanted to point it out because when you look at the region in general, it's definitely a difference in numbers.
I think there should be a survey question that either indirectly asks something like this.
Economic status
Something.
or okay, moving on to the employment.
Information, you could get information like that for but from taxes and assessments, and that will quickly indicate whether or not that's a consistent number with reality.
Yeah.
So moving on to employment, you're seeing that the primary employment by residents is in the management business fields, followed by the science and office, and that mimics the county. And then in terms of the types of industries residents work in, just like the county, educational services, healthcare, those sorts of professions, followed by professional, scientific, management, administrative professions, and then followed by manufacturing. And then prime working age in the township, population. So the prime working age is defined as between 25 and 54 years. And so Franklin is a little over a third of the population, which is the same as in Chester County, that falls into that range. So moving on to housing, which we were talking about earlier, here's your housing information. So most of the housing is in single family detached housing, 93% approximately. The county's is about 2/3 in single family detached housing. As I'm sure a lot of you know, in recent years, the county has been adding a lot more multifamily units. So that probably also contributes to the number we're seeing here for the county being 2/3 and Franklin being over 90% of a single family detached. And I think it also reflects the fact that you're a rural township. And then we looked at age of structure, and it's not surprising that the ages of structures are going to correlate with your population booms. And as we all know, that housing construction lags behind population booms. So even though in this decade between 2000 and 2010, you were starting to have a decrease in population, there was still a good amount of housing being built because it was addressing the population that had come into the township, in the decade prior, since it takes a while to build housing. So those statistics are fairly expected on what you're seeing for when you had your population booms. And as you can see, to address the question from earlier, in recent years, the housing, maybe to address what you were saying, the correlation of preserving open space and not having as many people move into the township, you can see that the number of housing units being built has gone down dramatically from where it was in 2000 and in this decade, 2000 knots.
Jeannie, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
This is an American Community Survey.
Mhm.
And at the very beginning, I think you caveated that, look, it's the American Community Survey. So I don't know if we should take some of these numbers with a grain of salt, because there's certainly it's the best information we've got from a single source.
Mhm.
Should we take it with a grain of salt, given that
Yes.
it is from one source, and there are probably better sources that are more accurate?
Yeah, that's why I was saying from the beginning, take it for what it is. It's not the be all end all. The census is obviously better data, but this is the most accessible data we have for the purposes of looking at a macro level analysis. And I would take it as it gives a big picture look into what the township, what the demographics are, and things like this. I mean, in the big picture look, okay, when the housing was built corresponds generally to when the population booms are. That would be the takeaway that I would have, that, very generalized macro kind of takeaway.
Yeah.
So
I'm just very concerned, especially when it's up front. I'm very concerned with bad data. because we all know that data mining and bad data just leads to bad decisions. And so I'm really careful about, okay, what is the error that, or the bias that's introduced by like relying exclusively on American survey.
Maybe the way we couch this data is in terms of trends and forces, and not so much as this, going into granular, whether or not there was a 0.8% increase versus a 1.23% increase between 2010 and 2014. But the overall trend was trending up, and now it's trending down significantly. So maybe if we can recouch this data as a more trends and forces type discussion rather than a specific hard data discussion, which is kind of how we're presenting it here.
Yeah,
Is that where you're going?
Excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent point, David. Usually when I have bad data, or not bad data, I don't print bad data, but what you do is you make the figure smaller and you do it as a thick trend line.
Right.
And that covers your more representative of what's going on. And so I believe directly on par there with, this is general trend information, not accurate to the level of 2%, 5%, maybe sometimes 10 or 20% on that number of 1%, say, for example.
Right.
Yes, maybe you're right. I agree with you.
It can be portrayed in different ways when we get to the, when our graphics team, takes all this data. It can be portrayed in pie charts or what other kind of charts. But for the purposes of this conversation, we wanted you all to be able to see the data.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate
You're
that.
looking at, but it doesn't necessarily have to be portrayed this in the final plan. Although I do have to say, if you have to also be careful, because even though we all know this is only as good as it is, if the numbers aren't made readily available, then people could be upset that too much of generalized statements are being made and that people don't have access to the numbers. So it's possible that in the plan itself, a graphic representation goes in the plan, and then in the appendices, you put these numbers.
I think also, like, looking at this through the lens of comprehensive planning, what would be helpful for Janine, Benny, and I is, you all live there. Some of you have lived there for decades. If something we're putting on here is a red flag, as in like, oh no, there's actually lots of apartments, it's not all single family like you're seeing, that's what we need to know as well. Because like you said, Barry, data can be wrong. And I think Dave made a great point that it's not about the 0.08 or the 1.2, but for us in like Janine said, in the macro, the big picture is when you guys are reviewing this tonight, tomorrow, over this whole process, when something big stands out, that's something we really need to know, because we're not always boots on the ground. You're our boots on the ground for this.
And we tried to, when we wrote the description, we tried to do what you were talking about, Barry, and, round things, saying things like around 1/5, we're built to keep everything very generalized. I don't think in any of this analysis, we ever got into any kind of, in the written analysis, we didn't get into any of these types of numbers, in the written analysis.
David mentioned is a great idea, versus, and then maybe in an appendix, but general trends in a figure people can follow, and then also maybe we can get an intuitive idea. It is a lot about how the data is presented. I do appreciate seeing it, but all data has limitations. And the one thing that does concern me is, that you pump up that poverty statistic like that, and then you have to say, oh, okay, all right, how many families are we talking about here, and is this even reasonable or accurate? Because that's a huge change. Okay. Anyway, thank you for your
change. And I think it's also important to mention that the surrounding municipalities, Elk, New London, et cetera, their data would have the same level of accuracy or inaccuracy as Franklin's. So when you're looking at this in context for the other surrounding, let's just say, inaccurate levels of data, then there is still something here, even if it's only, I don't know, 10 people. I'm just making up numbers, but there is still a change here that we're not seeing in, let's say, Elk, or we're not seeing in the other inaccuracies of the data.
Well, London,
So-
Britain looks a little suspicious because it dropped to almost nothing. So that's,
Yeah.
They lost population also.
And what about London Grove too? What happened there? So they had a similar spike.
yeah,
Same.
they did.
So
So-
London Grove, Franklin, both of them are showing a pretty significant increase. So I'm wondering if we can, I mean, I don't know if we're getting lost in the woods here, but it might be worthwhile just to go look at those two data points and see why are they so far, why are they outliers compared to the region?
It could be, David, you know, there's alternate things that can happen here. You could be concerned, project your idea that, this is poor kids or something like that. And it actually could just be an aging demographic that has a very low income. So it could be something that's, you know, just something like that, and not what we're imagining it to be like, which would be working families of 4, you know, under a poverty line. It just could be elderly as well. So anyway, all right. Great.
When we get to the housing prices, I think that, I mean, that could also be a factor because the housing prices are pretty significant, you know, in the township. I don't think we should dwell on this to the level of detail we're dwelling on it. But again, as Mason brought up a really good point, and that is the data is only so good. And if there's any oddities in the data, are there any big picture items that we should know about? So for example, if you were going to say a major employer went out of business and that created an increased poverty level, that would be a boots on the ground sort of thing that we would need to know. And that could have influenced what we're seeing in the data. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm saying that that's, you know, what Mason was trying to get at. So when we go down to the bottom of this page, 13, we just look at the amount of rental versus owner occupied units. And it's not surprising in your community when we see how many single family houses there are, and the fact it's a rural community, it's not surprising that, you know, it's mostly owner occupied units. That's expected. And then we look down here on the, you know, the housing data, and just look on what your biggest percentage is. And it's from the 300 to the 500,000 range, which is a relatively expensive house. Now that mimics, in terms of the highest percentage category in the county, it mimics that as well. But notice the county's at about a third of the houses being that price, and the township's at about half houses being that price. So that could also be correlated somehow or another to the poverty situation. As we all know, there's a lot of people out there that are house poor. That's not, you know, that's not a secret. So I don't know if that, you know, that correlates to there. And we note that the median price, a housing value, is about 10% higher than the county's overall. So that's something significant too, because as you were saying, you're a rural community, there's a lot of farms, whatever. So somebody might not expect the housing prices to be maybe as high as they are showing, at least in this data. And then we also looked at rentals, and the rents are relatively, you know, high also, with most of the rents being in this $1,000 to $1,500 a month category. And that's a pretty significant number, 70%. Now the county also has that as its highest number as well, but there's also, you know, more of a range when you compare the county overall of different, you know, rent ranges. So I think it's fair to say overall that the housing prices are relatively expensive in the township when you compare them, you know, to the county overall, which is going to impact, you know, cost of living, affordability, poverty levels, that sort of thing. Does anybody else have any questions about anything more in chapter 2 or any other input? So it is 8:42 right now. And as we said in the agenda, the meetings would end between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Would you like to venture in our last approximately 15 minutes to start talking about priority subject areas, or are you all pretty much spent for the night? What is your preference?
I'd like to know what our homework is.
Yeah, what 15 minutes is a lot to say, okay, this is our priority subject areas. That's pretty big.
Your homework is to look at this agenda item and to look at, as we said here before the meeting, think about specific subject and areas of the township, and certainly pull out a map of the township, even if it's a Google map, and look at areas of the township that you think should stay as they currently are, or if there's areas that you like a lot but maybe could be enhanced, or if there's areas that are just not working at all and those areas should be improved. So for an example, from what I've heard, your open space preservation program seems to be working well. And so maybe your open space preservation program and your plan of action for that should remain as it currently is. Something that could be enhanced, maybe in the village, there's an intersection or there's a streetscape that you like, but it could really use some TLC. And then maybe there's an intersection in the township that is unsafe, people speed, etc., and just isn't working. And you really think that that needs to be changing. And then take those concerns and put them into a larger scale, like a more of a macro scale, where they would turn into priority subject areas. So this would be, there's 5 intersections in the township that don't work. So one of our priority subject areas will be how to address intersections in the township.
Is there a way that you intend for us to share by email? I mean, does it always have to be email? Can it just be a Google Doc folder that we all share? So for example, if Nan has a map that she wants us all to look at, she can just toss that in there. How do you suggest, especially during this time of COVID restrictions, that we share these documents? And I'm throwing out the idea of a shared Google folder.
Does the township have one set up that we could use? Because that would be preferable.
So I think we can probably set up a Dropbox pretty easily. There's plenty of services that we can do that. So maybe my homework is to get that set up over the next 30 days, and we will get that done. So this group will have a folder for shared documents. We've been talking about this anyway for some of our internal documents. So it's very easy to set up a subfolder that just has this group's access. So we can do that, no problem.
Can it be Google so it's literally shared documents?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it can be that. It can be Google. That's fine. Easy enough.
That'd be terrific. It's a uniform format that goes across all email and everything like that. It's pretty transparent.
Yep,
easy.
I've used it.
Yeah.
Yep,
okay,
so
I
it's
idea
good.
that we do the Google Docs. And as soon as possible, so that again, we don't like just duplicate each other's work, but we can move forward and have it maybe on done chronologically, so there's a folder so we can track the progress.
And I think too, it would be good for you to make sure you don't redo each other's work with this particular exercise, but to a certain extent, if every single person on the task force is coming up with the exact same ideas, then clearly those are ideas that are, on everybody's minds. So I don't know that it would be entirely a repetitive exercise.
Yeah, I think the goal is we're all going to be doing our own homework. We'll have a single document once we combine all of our thoughts and ideas. It's just a place where we can all put these documents. That the document we're looking at right now is up there. We can download it and take a look at it. And it'll evolve. So we'll get it opened, and I'll invite this group, and we'll have that set up by the end of this week.
Great, thank you, David.
As you all are thinking about your homework and what we just discussed, please don't forget to think about stakeholders or important individuals who might play an important role in that, because we need that list as well. So that would be great.
Yeah, so the way we talked about it was we don't know the questions we're going to need to ask yet. So it's going to be kind of hard to do that until we actually get together again and start talking about what it is that's important. Right. So we'll work on that.
And I found in other communities that sitting down with a map,
yeah,
particularly an aerial map, really helps hone in your thoughts. Just to get them on paper more easily rather than not looking at anything. So that might be helpful. But the goal is each one of you should have 4 to 6 priority subject areas. And again, they can certainly be specific, but they have to be generalized enough that they could be turned into a chapter of a document and, cover enough of a substantial subject that it can be considered part of a comprehensive plan, versus just one. Let's just say one intersection becomes an entire plan chapter. That really wouldn't be covering as much, we're looking for in comprehensive plan policy for the township, or what you would all be looking for. So does anybody have any other questions? It was nice meeting you all, and I'm looking forward to working with you all. I think we have a lot of good discussion going on here and a lot of good, it seems like a really diverse group with experience-wise. So I think that's really good to have different perspectives and different backgrounds, represented here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. Take care and
Thanks,
see you
Janine.
next month.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.